Wittgenstein says that he saw this diagram in a newspaper or somewhere, and it gave him the idea of states of affairs as what we would nowadays call truth makers. So if we have a true sentence or true belief, then in some cases at least, that is because there is something in the world which makes it true, which it corresponds to. Now, of course, that thing is more like a sentence than it is like two people fencing. So that thing at the top is a kind of sentence. It's a pictorial sentence. And then he said, well, maybe all sentences are pictorial. It's just that sometimes instead of using stick figures, we use words like John. And then those words stand in relations to each other, which correspond to the relations that the people or other entities which those words name stand. And so that's how we get truth, by having a mapping relation between a picture and a state of affairs. And so that's how we do it with words. So in order to have a picture theory of truth along these lines, you need to have two kinds of relations. One is the projection, the arrows, and then there has to be, so the arrows tie the one thing to the other, but they have to tie the one thing to the other in such a way that the structure of the one thing pictures the structure of the other thing. So you need to be tied to one complex of things, and you need to picture that complex of things by having a structure which is analogous to the structure of the complex of things that you're picturing. And for Wittgenstein was a phantologist. The Tractatus is a phantological Bible, and it's very like Armstrong's view. Everything is made of atoms, and the only things which really exist are atoms, absolute simples, and then they get combined, and we have words for these various combinations, as a result of which we can get truth by unpacking the meanings of all those words for the complexes in terms of the names, the simple names for the simple atoms. And no one really believed Wittgenstein. David Armstrong probably believed him in the sense that he thought that there would be a universal absolute science in which all the atoms of the universe would finally be recognized and exposed for what they are. But even Armstrong didn't really believe in the absolute future perfect atomistic reductionistic science. So, but people still think that there is a good idea in Wittgenstein's picture theory, and the way to rescue this good idea, I believe, is to recognize nesting. So there are many objects, not just atoms as Wittgenstein thought, but also complexes, and these are entities in reality with exactly the same civil rights as the atoms. We can give them names. We don't need to define the names in terms of the atoms which form the complexes, and we probably shouldn't want to, because complexes like persons are gaining and losing atoms and molecules and cells all the time, so they're under constant flux. But still they exist over time, and that's because the rules governing existence at the large scale complex level are different from the rules governing existence at the smaller scale complex levels. So there are objects on many different levels of granularity. We don't even need to worry about what the lowest level is, because we can do so much work at all the medium-sized levels where we have lots of information. So we don't care about reductionism, we don't care about ultimate atoms, because we can do everything that we need in the way of understanding truth in the mid-levels. So this is mesoscopic metaphysics. So we can have knowledge of the world at different scales. That's the idea. So we have a picture theory according to which truth obtains as a relation between complex expressions and complex entities, and we can have the same relation at different levels, not just at the ultimate level of simples. So this is an example. So Blanche is the name of a complex object. Fencing is the name of a complex process. Mary is the name of a complex object, and we get a true sentence about the complex, which is those two objects participating in the same process. And what it means to have different levels is that what is simple at one level may be complex at another, relative to another level. So being simple now is level dependent, level relative. And we can start anywhere we like in the level hierarchy. Now, this is an example of a partition at one level. This is the level of chemical elements. This is a very beautiful partition. It's not exhaustive, but it's such that all the cells in this partition are disjoint from each other in the sense that nothing in one cell is ever in any other cell. And I want to call a thing like this a partition. I want to use the technical term partition. And so the partition is what you get when you draw a boundary like that over some domain. The domain may be the whole of the world of chemistry, the whole of the universe, actually. You find chemical elements everywhere in the universe. Or it may be just two people fencing. So in each case we make a partition. We divide two people fencing into three entities, two people and one fencing. So this is one person and one tower, and we partition it to make that. That's a two-object partition. And it has two cells. One cell is occupied by a sculpture. The other is occupied by a tower. And we could label the cells. So the label on the left would be Bishop Gurgur, spelt without any vowels. GRGR. It's a Croatian way of spelling Gregory, I guess. And then the tower is the tower of in Split. I think it's the cathedral tower in what was Yugoslavia, now Croatia. So we create partitions. Some partitions pre-exist our creation. So the partition of the chemical elements, we created it, but it was really there before. So we discovered it. By creating the partition, we represented a discovery. So partitions of artifacts of our condition, but some partitions are, as we might say, true or veridical. So that it's not that we create what we partition, although we could do that in the land of unicorns. So partitions are transparent. So I think we had this slide in an earlier talk. So this is Alberti's grid as an aid for painting. And as I say, we can often label the partition. So I'm not sure. Something went very wrong with the color scheme on. It just says you have to be very careful what colors you use. This is the Dewey Decimal Classification, the library catalogue. So this is a very big partition. And earth sciences. So it's partitioning what a book can be about. That gigantic domain, which is even worse than musical genre. And it's very difficult to keep this thing going as a partition in which the cells are disjoint. All right, and then the labels obviously can apply at different levels of granularity. So this is a mouse chromosome, which is labeling parts of the structure at different levels of granularity. These are some examples of partitions from different domains, so chess and music, and I guess the middle one is music, and bosons. And then the idea is that many partitions are transparent. They're true of the reality which they partition. And this one is a non-scientific partition. It's not quite Magritte. I changed Magritte slightly. So, when we use language, we're partitioning. When we use language to do science, we're partitioning. Every sentence which is put forward as an assertion about reality is partitioning reality in such a way that we make a tiny number of cells and we relate them to each other. In just the same way that we might say that Bishop Gurgur is to the west of the statue of the cathedral. And then we can manipulate partitions. So we can refine a partition by making it more fine-grained. Or we can extend a partition by extending its range. So we might say Bishop Gurgur is to the west of the tower and to the north of the crypt of the Emperor Diocletian. And then the idea is that there could be a total partition of everything in the universe. That's a kind of philosophical idea. That could be done either on the level of instances, which is what Armstrong wanted to do with his spreadsheet, or it could be on the level of universals. So we could have a partition of all the types of entities in reality. And that might be doable. So that there is one ontology in the Wikipedia list of upper ontologies, which I think has 300,000 terms. Anyway, it's very big, made by a Russian who complains that other people's top-level ontologies are too small. It may be that is what he's trying to do. So, in principle, a partition can comprehend the whole of reality, and we have, in fact, achieved this goal. I had a bit of help, but I managed to create a partition that comprehends the whole of reality, and I call it the Spinoza partition. But also, a map of the heavens gets pretty close. I mean, it fades off at the sides, but... Alright, now, so that's the Spinoza partition. Now, that's pretty close. That gets the whole of reality. Yes?
So, would you consider BFO to be a partition?
Given what I've said so far, I guess I have to. And you were out of the room when I talked about partitions of universals. So Aristotle's theory of categories is a universal partition, claims to be. BFO does not claim to be a universal partition because I say, well, there are areas that BFO just doesn't touch. Mathematics. Roles of information artifacts. I don't know where to put them. No one has a good theory yet, but we'll work it out. Maybe we extend BFO. We're quite happy with the idea that BFO may need to be extended. Every good scientist has to be happy with that idea.
But the partition of universes.
Yes. So every paint table that you get from a paint shop with all the colours is a partitioning of universals. That is a partitioning of universe. But we're also, if you imagine this being applied like a template upon everything in the universe, we're partitioning all the instances. It would take a while to do it. But all right, perspectivalism. Different partitions may be skewed to each other. So these are two universal partitions which are skewed to each other. Spinoza is consistent with all partitions, of course. And so partitions, this is a partition, and there are some roles which are vacant, but the partition stays. So organograms are partitions. And you can have partitions which create objects. So Fiat objects are Kansas, for instance, is full of Fiat objects because it was divided by means of a partition which relied on rectilinear counties. Amherst, New York, is like that too.
Iowa is much more consistent with the rectilinear counties.
Iowa?
Yes.
I see. Well, maybe I should use Iowa then.
Only issue is Potawatomi, which is like 2 blocks.
Oh yes.
And then obviously we had this.
And that's because they had to keep the same scheme, but there were geography
Well,
artifacts which were getting in the way.
yeah, the
I see.
Germany,
That's interesting.
But because of the population or something, they basically did not follow that rule, and so it's up to a day journey. If you're in the north part of Potawatomi.
Okay, so, and then there are fiat partitions of real things. So the partition of diseases or of disease courses into severe and mild and so on. The lines between them are fiat lines, and they could change if insurance companies change the rules, or if doctors come to a new agreement about where severe starts. And then there are partitions that involve both fiat boundaries and bona fide boundaries, for instance, brain region maps. The line down there, circled in pink, is a straight line. So, what is a partition? It's a way of projecting cells onto reality, or indeed onto unicorn non-reality. And now I want to say not merely that every assertional use of language involves a partition, but also all intentional directedness, all aboutness involves a partition. So when I see an apple, I don't see molecules. When I think about an apple, I don't think about molecules. When I look at the color of the wall over there, I don't think of molecules of paint, because I'm partitioning reality in such a way that my partition is coarse-grained. And granularity goes hand in hand with intentionality. Granularity, incidentally, goes hand in hand with vagueness. So the issue of vagueness differs according to the level of granularity. If you're in a bar and your glass is empty, you're just a customer. So you go to the bar counter, the bar, and ask for another beer. But if you're a health inspector and you look at the very same glass, you might say it's not empty at all, it's full of salmonella or something like that. And so that's because the granularity of the intentionality of the health inspector is different from the granularity of the thirsty beer drinker. So formally speaking also, you can define granularity as the other side of the coin from the way you define vagueness. All right, and then intentionality can go on holiday, and so partitioning can go on holiday too. So this is Alberti's grid again. And then, because some partitions are transparent, we can indeed reach out to reality. If they were not transparent, which is what some philosophers say, then we could never reach reality. All right, so, and now counting requires partitions. So this is where Frege went wrong. So the way you count is to partition reality. This is really... measurement requires partitions. Whether you're partitioning numerically or qualitatively, whether you're measuring numerically or qualitatively, in both cases you're using partitions. Now this is a very nice partition of an irregular sort, and this is a somewhat nice part of reality. And there is a map projection which connects all the parts of the partition on the left with corresponding parts of the entity on the right. So by using the map, you are using a partition. We have counties too. I won't say they're better than the Iowa counties, but they were earlier than the Iowa counties.
Probably created with a much different method.
Absolutely, yes. So they were created by the method called seeing which count controlled which area, or which duke. All right, so now we go back to the Tractatus. Wittgenstein says, and I'm going to read this because it comes from the Phantological Bible, the proposition is the propositional sign in its projective relation to the world. That's what the map is. That's a proposition. And so we have all of these things. Then we can define falsehood and projection failure and coordination failure, and that's the end. Well, maybe that's the end.